Am I the a-hole for choosing my daughter over my girlfriend? I, 40M, have an 18-year-old daughter with my ex-wife, call her Maddie. We divorced when she was 7, and I have her 3 weekends a month. Her mom moved to a suburb almost an hour outside the city to be closer to her family and for a better school. My work was in the city, and after a while Maddie got sick of all the driving and asked if we could go to a different schedule. We talked most days on the phone, and I have been very involved in her life. She's a great student, graduated with over a 4.0, has a lot of friends and what I thought, very nice boyfriend. She has no idea what she wants to do with her life, and had already decided to defer her scholarship a year to take classes at the community college and work. I also have a girlfriend Vera, 37, and she gets along with Maddie great. We've been together about 2 years and she just moved into my house a few months ago. Her old roommate got married and she couldn't afford rent alone. We'd been together almost 2 years and I was considering proposing, so it seemed like a good idea after she couldn't find another place. She pays the electric and water bills, but my house is paid off, so I just pay taxes, insurance, and the other utilities, and it's been great. I didn't really date much the past few years between Maddie and work, so it's nice having someone always around. Vera doesn't want kids of her own, and I don't want any more, so it's been great. When Vera first unpacked her boxes into the master bedroom, the whole dynamic of the house shifted in a comfortable way. We had our routine down. We would make coffee together in the mornings, spend lazy evenings on the couch, and talk about the future in casual, comfortable bits and pieces. Vera was careful with her space, bringing in her own furniture, settling into the layout, and making the spare rooms feel like part of a shared home. Maddie had her own room down the hall, decorated exactly how she left it, with her old high school posters, stacked textbooks, and framed pictures on the desk. Even though Maddie spent a lot of time at her mom's or with her friends, this was always her home too. Her clothes were in the closet, her personal items were in the bathroom, and her presence was built into the foundation of the house. Vera knew that from day one. They got along well, exchanging light conversation whenever Maddie came over for her regular visits, sharing meals without any tension, and keeping things entirely pleasant. So for all that, Maddie is pregnant and her mom has kicked her out. Her boyfriend has another year left of nursing school and lives in a college apartment with roommates. She is of course staying here for now and found out late. She's due in January. The moment Maddie found out, her entire world unraveled. Her mom's reaction was harsh and immediate. There was no middle ground, no sit-down discussion to figure out a path forward, just a demand that she pack her things and leave. Maddie showed up at my front door with her bags crammed into the trunk of her car, completely overwhelmed. Her face was pale, her eyes were red from crying the entire drive over, and she could barely keep her voice steady when she walked through the entryway. She didn't come in with a list of demands or an attitude, she was terrified. Her boyfriend came over shortly after to sit down with her. They had spent the last few days in an absolute spiral, trying to process everything that was happening to them while realizing the weight of the situation. They sat at the kitchen table, their hands laced together so tightly their knuckles were white. They went over all the options available to them, weighing the realities of their age, their finances, and their future. They talked through what it would mean for his schooling, what it would mean for her community college classes, and how they would handle the sheer financial burden. After hours of quiet, difficult conversation, they decided to keep the baby. She told me very meekly and asked if she could stay. She looked at me like she was waiting for the other shoe to drop, terrified that I was going to react the exact same way her mother did and push her out into the cold. I looked at my daughter, seeing the absolute fear in her eyes, and I told her of course. She knows this is disappointing, but she'll never stop being my baby, and if this is what's going to happen, I'm here to support her within reason. As in, I'm fine babysitting if she has work or class, and she will keep working and going to school, but I'm not babysitting for her to party or hang out with friends. If the boyfriend bails, which I was as kind as I could be but told her happens even with the nicest boys, she would need to file child support. And I would give her grace before and after birth, but when she's recovered she will go back to doing chores on top of baby ones. I told her and the boyfriend to sleep on it and they did. They went back to his place for the night to digest everything we discussed, process the reality of the ground rules I had set, and actually look at the numbers. They came back the next day with actual thoughtful responses, and even a budget goal that I found impressive. They had pulled up local costs for diapers, formula, health insurance adjustments, basic baby supplies, and estimated gasoline expenses for her commute to the community college. They showed me spreadsheets on his laptop, detailing how much he made from his part-time shifts and how much she earned from her work hours, mapping out an exact savings plan month by month until the baby arrived in January. Seeing 2 teenagers step up and take that kind of direct accountability made it clear to me that they weren't looking for a free ride, they were just young people facing an overwhelming life change who desperately needed a stable place to stand. So, the tiny bedroom next to Maddie's that is currently home to a treadmill I never use is going to be a nursery. Of course I've kept Vera in the loop during all of this. And by this I mean I don't know how many different ways I need to put this so it gets through people's heads. Vera and I discussed all of this before I talked to the kids. In depth. We sat down in the living room on the sofa, and I laid out every single detail of what was happening with Maddie. I made her very aware that the three of them could end up living here for a few years while the boyfriend finished nursing school and Maddie finished her associate's degree and got on her feet. I didn't hide anything. I didn't sugarcoat the timeline, nor did I minimize the space it would take up in our lives. Vera was supportive. She listened, she nodded along, and she explicitly gave me the impression that she understood the necessity of helping my daughter through a crisis. I kept her in the loop at every step of the process. When them living here became the plan, she gave me an ultimatum and told me to kick my daughter out because she's an adult. The shift happened so fast it left me stunned. We were standing in the kitchen after Maddie and her boyfriend had left to run an errand, and Vera's entire demeanor completely changed. The calm, understanding attitude she had displayed during our initial conversations evaporated into thin air. Her posture went rigid, her arms crossed tightly over her chest, and her tone turned cold and rigid. She got upset and said if she wanted to raise a baby she'd have one of her own. She said she didn't sign up for this and is not okay with it, and demanded I rescind the offer, that Maddie is 18 and needs to figure it out on her own if she wants to keep the baby. I stared at her, completely unable to process how she could expect me to dump my own child onto the street during the most vulnerable moment of her life. I told her I wouldn't do that, she'll always be my daughter and needs help. I tried to reason with her, explaining that turning an 18-year-old pregnant girl out with nowhere to go wasn't an option for me as a father, but she didn't want to hear any of it. She threatened to move out if I didn't tell Maddie to get out, expecting that threat to force my hand and make me choose her over my own blood. Instead, I just looked at her, exhausted and deeply saddened by the lack of empathy she was displaying, and told her I understood her position and that if she felt she needed to leave, I wouldn't stop her. She got mad that I told her I understood. She seemed furious that I didn't immediately panic, throw my hands up, and surrender to her demands. Now she's avoiding the both of us, but still staying here, or being snippy. The atmosphere in the house has become completely suffocating. Vera walks through the common areas like a ghost, refusing to make eye contact with Maddie and giving me the absolute cold shoulder. When she does speak, it's clipped, passive-aggressive remarks about space, noise, or minor household inconveniences. Maddie is constantly walking on eggshells, creeping around the hallway, whispering in her own room, and apologizing for simply taking up space in her own home. She feels the heavy tension in the air, which is the absolute last thing a pregnant teenager trying to hold her life together needs to be dealing with. Vera stays in our bedroom with the door shut for hours, coming out only to grab food or use the kitchen when she knows Maddie isn't in there, yet she hasn't made a single actual move to pack her bags or leave. I don't know what she expects me to do, but it's making the entire house anxious. Edit. Stop saying that Vera would be shocked that Maddie moved in. This is Maddie's home. She's always lived here. Yes, the rest is a surprise, but not my daughter living in her home. Am I the a-hole? Update. Me the push I needed to have a real conversation with Vera instead of letting the situation keep dragging on. When we sat down to talk, Vera spoke first. She did apologize, at least to a point. She explained that she had always expected Maddie to stick to the same custody schedule she'd had for years, or maybe spend a little more time here as she got older, but she never imagined she would end up living here full-time, especially while pregnant. On top of that, she genuinely didn't think I would offer to let her stay after the baby arrived. She admitted that everything changed so quickly that she felt blindsided. She suggested what she considered a compromise. She said she could live with Maddie and the boyfriend, I'll call him Doug, staying here temporarily, as long as they had a clear plan to move into their own place once Doug graduated and started working full-time. She also wanted reassurance that she would never be expected to help raise the baby or babysit. Knowing there was an end date was, in her mind, the only way she could make peace with the situation. I told her I understood why the news had been overwhelming, but that wasn't really the issue anymore. The way she handled it crossed a line I couldn't ignore. Asking me to throw my daughter out of her own home wasn't something I could move past, and after thinking it through, I couldn't see a future for us together. That didn't go over well. She looked genuinely shocked, then angry, and the conversation spiraled from there. I told her she was welcome to stay in the finished basement for up to a month while she found another place. It's a walkout basement with its own little kitchenette, so she'd still have privacy. I also offered to reimburse her for every utility bill she'd paid since moving in. It came to around $790, but I rounded it up to an even thousand because I didn't want money becoming another argument. She wasn't happy with any of it and completely lost her temper. Things were tense enough that I called Maddie and asked if she could spend the night at Doug's place so everyone could cool off. I stayed home because I was working remotely anyway, but I gave Vera as much space as I could while she moved her belongings downstairs. At one point I offered to leave for a while if that would help, and she told me to fuck off. The next morning she texted me that she was moving in with a friend instead. I offered to help carry boxes or load her car, but she turned me down again. Before leaving, she set her key on the kitchen counter and walked out. Afterward I changed the security code, just to be safe, but told her that if she realized she'd forgotten anything she could let me know and I'd make sure she could come collect it. I honestly thought that would be the end of it. I wasn't celebrating the breakup by any means. I was sad that things ended the way they did, but I also felt relieved that the constant tension in the house was finally over. Unfortunately, that's not where the drama stopped. Over the next few days, Maddie noticed that several of her carnivorous plants started declining incredibly fast. She keeps pitcher plants and pings, and she's meticulous about caring for them. They're watered only with collected rainwater, to the point that I installed rain barrels because tap water can damage them. She also discovered that a noticeable amount of her concentrated fertilizer had disappeared. None of us can prove anything, and I don't intend to make accusations without evidence. Still, both of us have the same suspicion. Everyone in the house knew not to touch those plants because they're delicate and expensive. Watching them suddenly die off doesn't make much sense otherwise. Maddie has been absolutely crushed. She hasn't directly blamed Vera, but I can tell where her mind is going. I asked if she wanted me to do anything, whether that meant reaching out or replacing the plants. She told me no. Not long after that, Vera sent Maddie a nasty text blaming her for the breakup, telling her she was the reason I ended up alone and saying she hoped she was happy. I told Maddie to block her immediately, and thankfully she did. The part that bothers me most is seeing how defeated Maddie looks over the plants. She doesn't even want me to buy replacements. She says she'd rather try to save whatever survives, even if only a few make it. So, on a completely different note, if anyone knows good places in the US that sell healthy pitcher plants or pings, I'd appreciate the recommendation. As for me, I'm definitely staying single for a while. That's the last thing on my mind right now. There has been some genuinely good news, though. One of my longtime friends, who has kids of her own and has known Maddie since she was little, invited her out to lunch. My biggest concern lately has been convincing Maddie that taking a full college course load in the spring with a newborn wasn't realistic. Every time I brought it up, she insisted she'd figure it out somehow. My friend managed to get through to her in a way I couldn't. She explained that delaying one semester isn't going to ruin her future, especially if it gives her and the baby a better start. By the end of lunch, Maddie had finally agreed that waiting until the following semester made more sense. That conversation alone lifted a huge weight off my shoulders. I also sat down with Doug's parents. They're in the same boat I am. This obviously wasn't the future any of us expected, but they've decided to support the kids instead of dwelling on what already happened. They're even starting to get excited about becoming grandparents. They live a little over an hour away, so I let them know they were always welcome to use my spare room whenever they came to visit. Doug and I had our own conversation as well. He works part-time while finishing nursing school, and I told him that working this semester made sense. Next semester, though, his priority needs to be graduating. I made it clear that I'm willing to help support both of them financially, and with the baby more than I normally would, if it means he can focus on finishing his degree. The best thing any of us can do for my grandchild's future is make sure both parents are in the strongest position possible, and a nursing degree gives Doug a solid career. He seemed to understand exactly what I meant, thanked me, and handled the conversation with a lot more maturity than I expected. Maybe he's not as much of a ding-dong as I originally thought. Update 2. Hey guys, it's been a few months, and quite a few people have reached out asking how everything turned out. The biggest news is that my son-in-law, Doug, graduated. He's starting work very soon and only has to pass the NCLEX next month, which I'm honestly not worried about. He's always been a good student, and I have every confidence he'll pass. He was hired by the same hospital where I used to work, so I know a lot of the staff there. It's nice knowing he'll have experienced people around him while he gets settled. One of the charge nurses on his floor is actually an ex of mine. We ended on good terms years ago, so there's nothing awkward about it, and I know she'll make sure he's pointed in the right direction. He's going to be a great nurse. Once he accepted the job, I figured the next conversation would be about moving out. To be clear, I don't expect them to live in my basement forever, but I've also made it very clear that rushing into rent just because they finally have an income would be a mistake. Maddie is still in college, housing isn't getting any cheaper, and this gives them a rare chance to save money while they build their future. They agreed they'll stay here until she graduates, and honestly, I'm perfectly happy with that arrangement. Things around the house have settled into a routine. Maddie is much more comfortable asking me to watch the baby when she's overwhelmed or simply needs a break. Early on, I think Vera's comments made her feel guilty about accepting help, like she was somehow taking advantage of me. That feeling has mostly disappeared, and I'm glad it has. This is exactly what I wanted when I offered for them to stay. Of course, I'm also using every opportunity to convince my grandson that "Papa" should be his first word. I've got to have goals. I also made a pretty big career change. I left my old job and moved into consulting. The pay is better, and I usually work only 3 days a week. Between my schedule, Doug working overnights, and help from Doug's parents, we've managed to make everything fit together surprisingly well. Maddie has been taking summer classes and will be fully back on track this fall. She insists the baby will be attending the daycare at her college once classes start. I'll believe it when I see it. My guess is he'll spend at least a day or two each week hanging out with Grandpa instead. She's also become pretty funny about motherhood. She tells anyone who asks that our grandson is absolutely, positively going to be her last baby. I remember being her age and hearing her talk about wanting a huge family one day, so I'm not putting too much stock into that prediction. She can be incredibly stubborn, though, so maybe she'll prove me wrong. Another thing many people asked about was my ex-wife. A few months ago she finally apologized to Maddie. It wasn't a quick conversation, and it didn't magically erase everything that happened, but I know hearing those words meant a lot to her. Maddie kept her mom at arm's length for a while afterward, which I completely understood. Eventually, on Mother's Day, she introduced her to the baby. There were plenty of tears that day, and while I wouldn't say their relationship is completely repaired, they're moving in the right direction. That's more than I expected a few months ago. For everyone who kept asking about Doug's RuneScape account, I did ask him. I understood about half of his explanation, but apparently everything is going well. That's about all I can confidently report. I have started seeing someone. It's still very new, only a few weeks, so despite Maddie repeatedly telling me it's time, I haven't introduced her to the family yet. There's no rush. What I can say is she's wonderful. She has 2 kids of her own who are already in college, and she has never once complained when I spend far too long talking about my grandson. I think that's a pretty good sign. Update 2. This is more of a funny update than anything serious. I heard through mutual friends that Vera had been trying to date a few people I know. Nothing really came of it as far as I know, but eventually she started seeing a guy we both knew through a shared hobby. I don't know him particularly well, though every interaction I've had with him has been positive. He always seemed like a decent enough person. I don't have any contact with Vera anymore, but I still follow the guy on Instagram because we've known each other for years. A few days ago they posted that they're expecting a baby later this year. Honestly, I had to laugh. Vera was giving me endless lectures about how she was child-free and how she wanted absolutely nothing to do with children. Part of the reason our relationship ended was because she couldn't accept my pregnant daughter living at home, and she acted like anyone who chose a different path was somehow supposed to rearrange their life around her decision. Reading some of the comments on my last post, a handful of people seemed to agree with that mindset too. Apparently, things change. Now she's about to have a baby herself, which definitely wasn't on my bingo card. Life has a funny way of surprising people. I don't know what changed, and honestly it's none of my business. Maybe she genuinely changed her mind, maybe the circumstances are different, or maybe this was always where things were headed. Whatever the reason, it's her life. Her boyfriend is a few years older than I am, and the idea of becoming a first-time parent at my age honestly sounds exhausting. Then again, everyone has their own timeline, and if they're happy, good for them. Who am I to judge?
Thank you for watching. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Daily Tales Update.